This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
To realize the future America needs, we understand what's needed from us. To face each threat head on. We've earned our place in the fight for our nation's future. We are Marines. We were made for this.
Welcome to The Think Tank, presented by Modern Football Technology. The Think Tank is where top minds in football coaching come together to tackle some of the game's biggest challenges and explore innovative strategies. In each episode, we'll dive deep into key topics like offensive and defensive structure, player development, game day adjustments, trending concepts and schemes, and more. All with insights you can apply directly to your offense, defense, or special teams. Each week, you'll hear from 3 different coaches, bringing their unique perspectives, experiences, and game-changing approaches. Whether you're a seasoned coach or just starting your journey, the Think Tank will challenge your thinking and help you take your coaching to the next level. Get ready to elevate your coaching and see the game in a whole new way.
We get a bunch of information and really cool things. But then, okay, when I go back to my school and my kids, how am I going to teach this?
It should be genuine. You can get the most out of those visits if you have a genuine question you're legitimately looking for the answer for, not just waiting for someone to be able to tell you.
I love that you bring up the base thing, because just like you said, there are a million different ways to skin a cat, right?
Right.
And while it may be good for you, it may not be good for me, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't explore it.
We're back with the Think Tank, and today we're going to be on the defensive side of the ball, talking about strategies to study in the offseason and probably getting into how that translates into game planning later on in the year. And 3 guys who always excited to talk ball with, and it's great to bring them together. So we have Mike Giancola from Roanoke. He's the defensive coordinator there. Rob Everett is an offensive assistant for the Miami Dolphins, and Cody Alexander, of course, you know, from Match Quarters. Guys, thanks again for taking the time. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. This is a good crew, and I've known all of you guys for a long time, so it's really cool to get together.
Yeah, awesome. Well, with that being said, I'm going to be a fly on the wall and let you guys have that conversation. So I'll kick it over to you.
Exclusively on ESPN Plus, UFC 312, Saturday. Reigning middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis defends his title in a rematch against Sean Strickland. And Zhang Wei Li defends her strawweight title against undefeated Tatiana Suarez. UFC 312, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
This episode of The Think Tank is brought to you by our partner, Modern Football Technology. Trusted by elite programs like Sarah High School, Union High School, St. John Bosco, and Bishop Gorman, Modern Football Technology gives you real-time insights on opponent tendencies and self-scouting, saving you 8 to 10 hours of film breakdown every week. With air-free analytics and instant data integration, you'll gain a play-calling edge all game long. Visit teammofo.com to schedule your demo today and see how Modern Football Technology delivers real-time tendencies and real-time results.
All right, well, I suggested this topic selfishly because I want to know more and really I want to lean on Cody a little bit, you know, with seeing that is his life. What does it look like, your study process? How do you find it? Where do you go? You know, where do you get some of those ideas?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is I like to go through games quickly. So I'm looking for patterns. What am I seeing constantly? What are things that are showing up? Hey, they're lining this guy up, doing this. I'm seeing this coverage rotation towards this player, this front structure showing up. So I like to go through that and then go back. Once you kind of see that, then go back and then kind of do that hardline study or see if these patterns show up throughout the game. So right now, kind of in what I'm doing, compared to what I was doing when I was coaching is really just the pattern recognition. Because if you're seeing something multiple times, then that's usually going to show up when they play you or when you look at it throughout the season.
So I'm doing, part of my off-season study is I was assigned 2 teams to study. So it's been kind of like a learning curve of like how to and things like that. And I think that's the biggest thing is getting some sort of process together, where to start, because there's so much film out there. So, where do you begin looking at some of this stuff? The stuff that is really had a lot of benefit is just going back through, and whether you're padding a game or tagging a game, just grinding through it, you have that subconscious of like, I don't have to do this for necessarily the data, but it's like, wow, these things are popping up. And then, you're tagging plays or flagging plays to be able to make some cutups to look at a little bit deeper. So that's been a really cool thing in the last month or so, is to be able to, attach your language to somebody else's stuff and then see how it fits in. And I'm looking at it, I know this is a defensive podcast, but I'm looking at it actually from the offensive side of being able to say like, all right, this is what these guys are doing, what translates, what are they successful at also, because you got to find out what, you want to study the good stuff.
Yeah, I think too, I always love starting with a blank canvas. Even if you have some familiarity with whomever you're studying off season or even in season. And Rob, I know you and I have talked about this multiple times, for as long as we've known each other, but that process of actually tagging something where Cody, kind of like you were saying, patterns start to show themselves over and over again. It almost becomes part of the exercise, not just to get the data in, but almost subliminally, you're starting to break the data down on your own before you run reports, or you actually sit down and give it the full non-quick watch. I think part of that process and being able to start to frame what that picture looks like and try to be as objective as possible, right? Like, don't come in with the preconceived notions. Like I said, even if you are familiar with the opponent, just really trying to kind of see what that ends up looking like on the front end and how it may change on the back end.
Yeah, to your point, I actually always inserted the data myself, at least in the off season. So I would create my own kind of columns on Huddle that were just special to me, and I would label them Alexander. And even though we had here in Texas, a lot of times you'll have your junior high coaches or freshman coaches tag a lot of the games because that's a way for them to learn. It's no different than when you have a young coach padding a game. You have them, it's a way to learn. Obviously, there's quality assurance. We got to make sure that everything's right. But I would always go back in the off season and just do it myself. Go back through our games as a self scout. That helps you in terms of self scouting as like, man, we were seeing a lot of this in almost every game. You start realizing, and I always like to, when I go back and do it with the data we have, typically the set data, so like 2x2, 3x1, that stuff, personnel, I'll leave in. I won't redo that. I'll leave in and sort it that way from most to least, and then run past. And then you just start seeing the patterns in the off season as like, I've noticed like we're really getting this. This is a cluster here that we're seeing, or I'm seeing this in. And like you said, you're creating literally a mental map. I'm a big believer too. You were talking about a blank slate. This is going to sound really odd, but when I watch the film, I don't pay attention to down a distance in terms of just watching it. So like the first time I'm watching it, I'm just I'm going through the flow of the game, right? I'm not really I'm not trying to be like, okay, this is a first down. Oh, this is an early down. Oh, okay, this is third down. I'm really trying to watch through it. If I need to go back and check, then obviously you just scroll back and you're like, okay, what's down distance here? All right, awesome. But again, going back to the patterns, I think the first time you see it, look, just kind of going through the game flow of it. And then I love the inserting it on your own, I think is a huge thing, or just that's kind of the modern way. If you think about it, that's kind of the modern way of padding games. So I really like that.
And having soft eyes, there's no question, because I think a lot of times you try to solve too many problems on the front end. You're just and you don't have any exposure to the opponent. And it's like you're getting down to the laser focus rather than being able to see the big picture and then, funnel that whole thing down. Like, how do you find teams that you guys like to study?
I always try and start with like, if I want to study something, obviously like what do they do similar things, but I want to watch people that are doing more with less, right? Hey, this team I know isn't very talented, but they consistently are playing close games or they're holding opponents to a certain way. Especially like when I'm looking at college teams, I just did a thing on Bowling Green. The MAC is a great conference, especially at the top end of like defense. It's been a coaching incubator for a long time. So like, I think a lot of people go towards the logo and you forget that logo's there because they have the best players, right? So it's like, yeah, I'm a big believer in survival bias as well, of like, look, a lot of times you watch those tapes and there's bust after bust. The problem is they've got at the high school level, it could be they have a Division I football player that cleans everything up, or at the college level, it's like, yeah, well, that guy's going to play in the NFL. So even though he's made a mistake, he's got the recovery speed. So that's when I like, and then obviously too, I want to find a game where they're playing a decent opponent, that they're playing somebody that is, when I'm watching this, I'm going to get quality chess match into, on the other side of that.
Yeah. I mean, I was literally just thinking about this today. I was coaching with Mike in high school. We played a single wing team, and I literally was just thinking about this morning of like, I need to get that film because there are so many things that are applicable to our offense that we run at the Dolphins that you could take from a single wing defense that was made in the 50s or whenever it was. And it's like, I think that is being creative with where you find things is crucial. Because looking at the top level, obviously there's value there for sure, because you can see a lot of good execution a lot of times, but there are busts like you were mentioning. But there's some really creative things at the lower levels of football. I think the main reason is because you have to be creative with what you're doing because you may not have the people. And then, coaching in high school and Division III and things like that, the stakes are a little bit lower where it's like, yeah, I can give this a shot, and see if it works. And, they're not going to fire me tomorrow. And I think there's a lot of value in that, so you can see where that creativity shows up.
And I don't know if this thinking is backwards. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but when I'm trying to find teams to study, I'm not looking at, like if I'm looking at a defense, it's not necessarily a defense that runs what we run per se. Some translation I think is good, but I like to see what are people doing differently than what we are doing. Can I incorporate that? And can we incorporate that? And is there benefit to it? But kind of on the flip side of it, in our conference, we play two triple option teams, one that is more flex bone, one that is wing T based. We play a couple air raid teams. We play a pro style team. We play more of a heavier personnel smash mouth RPO type deal. So I'm also looking, hey, let's pick an offense, and then what are those defenses doing to better defend that? And it could be something that we are doing. It could be something different, front coverage or otherwise. But I almost kind of backward plan it, but similar in terms of like the classroom type deal is like, okay, so what am I trying to get out of this study and then go from there? But that's kind of how I've approached it here the last few years to see if I can get ideas on how to defend some things or better defend them with what we are doing. But then also, are there things that we are not doing that we should be that could really help us?
Yeah, and I think that's a key point too, is if you want to study a team and I'm just going to get all their tapes, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to watch it. I think the way that I approach it, like just, hey, I'm watching for patterns, I'm looking for things, I can go back and maybe tag it on my own. But I think what you're talking about is have a plan of action. Like if you're like, look, we struggled with this year, I'm going to get a couple of tapes of different teams that saw that and did really well against that. And then now I have one thing that I'm really watching for. And so now you can kind of, to me, it's the same thing when you talk to your players, is that I don't want you watching film and it turn into a time suck, like, because we can all just watch, right? Like if we're just trying to get numbers on, our number up for how much film we've watched, we're just letting it run, or we're just consuming it like a TV show, or like we're just letting it run in the background, then I think like sometimes when you go into a study and you don't really have an idea of what you want, you end up just watching the game. And so if you're watching the game, you're not really pulling anything from it. So I agree with you, like on that, like there's something that you need. That's when, look, I don't need to watch third downs. I'm not trying to get pressures off a third down when I'm trying to, understand like, hey, how is this team stopping this run concept? Or, hey, we really struggled against flex bone. This particular play in the flex bone, I know this team runs it. How are teams handling it and doing it a right way? To me, that cuts the fat from what you're trying to do, really pinpoints it, and it gives you a little quicker time when you're going and doing that.
Yeah, it's like situational football as well, like being able to go like, all right, who's got good 2-minute, concepts, like who's successful out there at doing some of that stuff. Because that's ultimately the stuff. There's too much to watch. To watch.
There is.
So there is value in people in, studying the opposite side of the ball is good at this on defense if you're looking at an offense. And then also, and so what are they doing? What is the common trend that's happening on the other side of the ball for success? I think there's a lot of value there. So something I was thinking also, I've had some cool conversations with some people past couple of weeks about, and this is sort of an off-season thing, but, like what to do and things like that. How do you break into certain places? And I think something that really holds true, whether you're trying to get on a staff or you're on a staff and you don't know what to do, is really chasing the stuff that interests you. Because I think you get the most work out of the things that's like, I was assigned third down. I'm not really interested in third down, but there's value in that, learning something that you're not interested in. But when learning, whether it's a new skill or learning a new scheme or some sort of deal of that you're really passionate about, and then you can really kind of turn it into your own and let it take a kind of a life of its own. Because I think that's where the most beneficial growth and information comes, when you take something that you're really passionate about and then really fighting the norm of, because I think what's hard about our game is that everyone is intimidated by the fact that, well, this is the way that it's supposed to be done. And it's like, I don't know if I can do that because that's not what's supposed to be done. And I think off-season studies or growth studies, however you want to look at it, it's really important. It's almost better if nobody's done that before. You might find it's horrible. You might find like, oh, this is a better way to do it. And that's where the innovation comes from. And that's study, that's learning new, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I think to me, you have to have a foundation. Like when I talk to young coaches all the time, I'm like, look, you learn your position first, get really good at it, whatever it is, whatever level you are, get really good at the fundamentals. The creativity comes from the fundamentals, right? So your circle of competency, learning new things, right? We're trying to push that circle of competency outward. That's where the creativity comes in, right? Is understanding that and then trying to prove it wrong. Oh, hey, these guys do it a different way. I've done, maybe I could add that. Hey, this goes with this, the way that we do it. And that's where you start using these interchangeable parts of football. And then you start moving on. And to your point, Rob, about just like, there are certain things in football that are almost dogmatic and almost like, it's like politics and religion. One of those, for instance, is run fits. Talk to 10 different coaches about run fits, you're probably going to get 10 different answers. And if you try and tell them that they're wrong, it could end in a fist fight, right? So it's like, we have all these different ways of doing it, but at the end of the day, you're going to do what you're comfortable with. And what you probably learn, anchor bias is a real thing. So it's like, I always am trying to like, look, I'm open. Look, if I am wrong, then I want to know. The way that I was doing things 10 years ago is not the way that I would do them now. I just got back from a clinic talking about, hey, part of the problem was I didn't have answers for this, right? Like, hey, what do we do now that receivers are moving? Because it used to be, you play in Texas, everybody runs air raid, everyone runs some sort of like a Bryles-esque system, Malzahn system, right? Where the receivers are kind of static, left and right, they don't really move them. Well, now, I mean, look, it's 2025. If you're not moving your best receiver around, like you're in trouble. Like you're probably not very good, right? So it's like, how am I going to do that? Now you have to think outside the box. Like, so I think to me, like to your point is like, you want to study people that are going to push it, but at the same time, like have a base, right? Do what you love. I mean, look, I love match quarters. That's the name of my brand. That's what I love. I love quarters coverage. But off of that, learning other things has enhanced the creativity that I have in the way that I see that. And so start with what you're passionate about, get to be an expert of it, have that circle of competency, and then try and push that outwards by learning different things, because you'll end up incorporating it. And that's where the creativity part comes from.
I love that you bring up the base thing, because just like you said, there are a million different ways to skin a cat, right?
Right.
And while it may be good for you, it may not be good for me. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't explore it. I think there's tremendous value into getting outside your comfort zone a little bit, especially as you study a team or defense, offense, whatever it may be. But staying foundational to the base, like you said, I mean, that's got to be a core piece of what you're doing. Now, just as an example, a few years back, this was when Giancola Everett was still with the Rams. I did a study on some of their 5-1 stuff. You had been a 4-2-5 guy and a 3-down defensive guy my whole career, and tried to expand a bit into what would it look like to run a bear front, but can we do it with 2 high safeties? Because that's a staple of what we do defensively. Thought he had some really good things and kind of opened my eyes. Now, did I do everything they did? No, but I was able to garner some things from that, but staying true to who we were defensively and who our players were, I think is really important. You watch some tape on the NFL and you try to bring it back to high school or even the college level. How many of those guys are running around the field with your team? They can do that because those guys are professionals. So, making sure that you kind of keep that in the back of your mind as well, but always keeping true to the base and then who your players are, I think is really, really important.
For sure. What are some of how do you like network and reach out? Cody, you have a good network of guys that you talk to. What's the best way that you guys have found to learn from someone, the off season is a good time to visit and stuff like that. What is the best way to, organize your visit or something like that if you have an opportunity to go visit somebody?
Yeah, I think for me, I always try and pick one place that's kind of that I want to learn more about that place, or I want to learn more about what they're doing. I know it's not financially feasible for everybody to just go and visit some place, all across the country, but locally, even, go see them in a clinic first. Hey, before you go to a place, go see them in a clinic first, see what they're talking about, see if they, that style matches the way that you're doing it. And then if you like it, contact the DFO or the school and see if they allow, the coach to come, or, hey, I want to come for spring practice. That's typically a more relaxed time. Recruiting's not going on, especially at the college level, so I always try and go visit one or two places in the spring and just spend a couple days and just give as much access as I can get. I'll take it and I'll just sit there and take notes, and I think, seeing other people teach, to me, like, you get a real good viewpoint of like different ways of doing presentations. I went to Oregon this past year and went and saw Dan Lanning and his staff work and practicing, and then the way they present things and kind of that whole kind of Saban Smart kind of tree and how they do things is just so impressive. And so you get ideas from that. I mean, I pulled off of that like something in a DB meeting. So my thing, my dad's always said, my dad's a longtime coach. He's like, if you can pull one thing from a clinic and take it back with you and it helps your program, then it was completely worth it. And so I think, to me, that's how I pinpoint who I want to talk, what I want to learn about. And then you go there and have specific questions and have those conversations. That way you're not wasting anybody's time.
Yeah, and I dealt with this earlier in my career, and I still a little bit, but don't be afraid to reach out to somebody.
Yeah.
Like, if you know people that know people, it's better if you know somebody directly, obviously, but advocating for the spamming of every coach that, you can on DM or whatever it is. But it's kind of like you were saying, Cody, do your homework a little bit, and then let's see if there are opportunities available. I know here, open door policy, especially for people locally, if they ever want to come through and talk ball and do all that stuff. I think, as you, again, this is where I kind of struggled. Like, I was intimidated when I was a high school coach to maybe reach out at times to the higher levels. And, you just got to kind of get over that a little bit, and if they don't respond, they don't respond. If they do, hell, you can probably get some pretty good stuff out of it, right? But I know that was something I struggled with a little bit early.
Yeah, and I'll just say this too. I tell guys all the time, don't be afraid of the lower level coaches. Like, in fact, a lot of times, I mean, you're probably more apt to talk to a high school coach than somebody like at Virginia Tech, right? Like or at University of Virginia, like these big schools, they get inundated all the time with it, and they have to kind of vet, they got to figure out who's going to come through that door. So especially look, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm really lucky. I live in Texas, and I was a Texas high school football coach, which is, you can literally walk into any campus in any of the schools here, and they're just going to have an open door and give you whatever you want, just because that's the environment that we live in. And because you never know when a school is going to have a D1 kid, especially if you're at the higher levels. But I know for guys that are out of state, it's really hard sometimes to get into these bigger schools. And look, just because they have that logo doesn't necessarily mean they're doing like a lot of really cool things. A lot of times you're better off to just go to a clinic that they're hosting or that they're at. And then, hey, down the road is a really nice D2 program that has a bunch of success. Why would I not go there? They're recruiting my kids every day anyway. And to that point, like, if I'm a high school coach here and I'm listening to this and I'm like, who are the guys that are coming through the door at my school that I really like? Those are the guys that you want to go visit, because they're the ones that are going to give you the information. They're going to sit down and talk to you. Because look, I've been around it. I've gone to NFL practices. I've gone to college practices. And a lot of times, unless you personally know that person at those upper echelons, I mean, dude, you're just watching practice, right? You're not getting anything. There's no information. You're just showing up. It's just cool, right? It's like an experience, right? But if you really want to learn, get with the people that are coming through the door, or that have good questions. Like, it goes back with my study. You're probably better at getting something in return if you have a very specific thing that you're asking, right? And it's a good question, right? So that, hey, you guys did this. Why are you doing this, right? Like, and then you're probably better off to get an answer. And then that's an open door now to be like, hey, what if I could come to practice, or could I sit in meetings before your practice? Like, that's always a good open door for that conversation.
Yeah, the specific question is a must when going to visit people. And I think it's just like you said, unless you're studying an entire team and padding a team. But there's nothing worse than when someone comes and visits and It's like, talk to me about offense. It's like,
Yeah.
ooh, that's a tough one. And so that goes back to doing the research of like, what do these guys do? What's a good question? It doesn't have to be a perfect thing, but it should be genuine. You can get the most out of those visits if you have a genuine question that legitimately looking for the answer for, not just waiting for someone to be able to tell you, this is my opinion of that. It's like, ask the question you want to know, not something that you want to prove something. But I think, Mike, you mentioned this, like intimidation or the fear of reaching out is, I think most guys in our profession, you send in the right email or get to the correct touch point, which unfortunately is not email, but you get the right touch point and most guys will help in those things. And I think finding cool stuff all over the place at every level is really interesting. And then the other thing that I was thinking about is like when you're networking or trying to meet people or things like that, a lot of times we look to, all right, I want to talk to the offensive coordinator. Yeah, I mean, you would love to talk to whoever you want to, but talking to the QC guy or talking to your peers and finding out information of, number one, is like, how did you learn this? Like, what are the pitfalls that you're noticing? You're not the play caller. You don't have to make certain decisions. Like, how does your day-to-day impact with this scheme or this process or, teaching style or whatever it is? So it is not just like, I want to learn about this play. Let me talk to the guy who designed it. It's like, what about the guy drawing the pictures? Like you can gain a lot of information from those guys that are on the ground doing some of that work, because you can gain an interesting perspective that ultimately all of this information that you gather, that you study, has to go back to, how does this apply to my team? Can this apply to my team? Can I teach this? And then go from there.
I think your point about the QCs, I don't think a lot of people understand. Like you go to a place, it's got a nice logo, they've got good players. You think that the position coaches are all like the most knowledgeable people, when in reality, outside of the coordinator, the guy that knows the defense the best is usually the quality control guy that's sitting over there controlling the film, and that you're probably stuck with for an hour while people are doing lunch or whatever, and he's got to work through it. That's the guy you want to talk to, because he's the one that knows all the problems. He's the one that's like, yeah, that's not really what we want to do, so you can usually get information. And even with the position coaches, I've had some really good time just sitting in an office with a position coach, because they're usually happy that you're there to talk to them, and not just, because there is a lot of coaching. Look, titles mean something in this business. Rob, you and I have talked about this. Titles do mean something in the business, but at the same time, like when you're going in, sometimes these guys that don't necessarily have the title are probably more knowledgeable and are more willing to give you information because nobody talks to them. I mean, think about how many times, people go into that office or go into a school and never once say anything to the guy in the back of the room that's running the film, right? That's running the cut-ups. That's the guy, because he's the one putting it in. I mean, we just went through a whole spiel about talking about padding games through doing data, right? That's how you learn it. It's like, who do you think's doing that? It's usually those younger guys, job. And they're way more willing to talk to you. So I think to me, that's a great point.
And then also from the networking standpoint, like somebody told me this a while ago, it's like, look, your peers are the ones that are going to be hiring you. If you're looking for a job, that's your goal of the network. The 60-year-old guy who's, on the tail end, like you guys are in different, times of life. Get around the people that are, it's like Cody's a stud, he's going to be the next guy, and then, kind of go from there. So I think it is easy to forget for sure.
I was going to say, with as much as you have to do in the coaching profession, right? Especially when you get up to the college and the pro levels and things like that directly tie to the day in and day out of your job. So for me personally, right now it is recruiting, and more recruiting, right? I'm working on the playbook, doing some of those things, but I relish the opportunity to just talk ball, and finding people that, again, not that you can't gain something from position coaches and coordinators and all that stuff, but, people that, like you're saying, are doing a lot of that work. I mean, at the drop of a hat, my bet is they're ready to talk shop with you, because it's not working on what they're working on right now, what they'll be working on for the next 12 hours.
Yeah, so, that's right.
Finding those guys, always a good thing.
I want to take a quick break and help you learn more about our partner for the think tank, Modern Football Technology. You've heard me talk about it, but I wanted to be sure you knew exactly what it does for you as a defensive coordinator and why you should consider using it to help you win games. To help me do that, Folsom High School defensive coordinator Jordan Ersick joins me to talk about his experience with Modern Football Technology. First, he shares why it gives them a playing advantage.
During the game, I mean, the biggest thing we're getting analytics on and tendencies on is ourselves, getting efficiency metrics based off of our front movement pressure coverage, comparing that to our call sheet, having the ability to filter during the game in between series, seeing, hey, is this the right call for this situation? Is it batting at an efficiency that is good for us? We always look at 40%. And, having the timing of when to go to the next call by situations by using those efficiencies. Another thing I'd say during the game is just being able to compare and contrast opponent tendencies. Historically, what did we see versus what we're seeing in game? Is 12 personnel on second and medium the same run pass split as what we saw historically? And if it's not, then getting that insight faster and allowing us to make those adjustments faster using objective numbers gets our coaching staff aligned with suggestions faster. I would say the third thing is probably being able to track how opponents are protecting their quarterbacks, being able to use metrics, slide direction information, and being able to see, what type of protection they're doing based off running back locations or formations, and certain concepts, tracking those slide directions, and then being able to draw up pressures and movements that counter that protection and get to the quarterback faster and create a lot more dirty pockets.
Coach Ersic likes to track what he identifies as the big six in-game in order to be sure that they're on track as a defense. He explains that here.
In game, another thing we're tracking is the big six, which is our game goals. For us, that's always tracking yards per play, third down conversion rates, 90% havoc rating, among other things. And this technology allows us to be able to make sure we're on track for those during the game and staying on par with our 6 game goals that we try to accomplish week in and week out, and making sure we're on par to hit those throughout the game.
In-game decisions at the speed of the game are reason enough, but the benefits of modern football don't stop there. Post-game, modern football technology will save you a ton of time, as Coach Ersic points out.
Post-game, it's huge. This is probably one of the most efficient seasons I've ever been around as a coach in terms of the amount of information we're able to accumulate and get done in terms of a time frame, which is for a lot of high school defensive staffs, it's a 48 to 72-hour window. And for us, we, after our game is done, we have 68 points of game data broken down at game speed. So we can import it to Huddle. Post game, I'm able to leave the office earlier because of that, because I don't have to break down the film. I don't have to stay up till 3 a.m. breaking down the film. We've even figured out a cool little way to get our correction notes in there as part of the import. So we don't even have to, accumulate correction notes to set up for meetings. When we roll up to film on early Saturday morning, I haven't touched the film since 10:30 the night before. It's already been broken down and done, and it takes very little to no time to do it. And then on the flip of that is our self-scout process is now instantaneous. We don't have to accumulate data and run reports in our video platform to self-scout anymore, because this data is instant and cloud saved. We can 3-game self-scout ourselves instantly every week. So we're able to, at our coaches meeting, be able to self-scout best, worst looks, what's our own tendencies, where do we need to break tendencies and such. And this is the first time I've ever been college or high school in a setting where we're able to do that every single week. And it's literally just because of this software giving us the time and allowing us to be efficient enough to do that.
So saving the time certainly is some of that return on investment, but ultimately, I think what coaches want to know, is it going to help me win games? So here's what Coach Ersic has to say for those of you who might be skeptical or wondering, is this going to help me win football games?
I think any good ball coach, I think 80% of it is still the Jimmies and the Joes and what types of kids are on your roster. I think 19% of it is your prep, which is coaching. And I think 1% of it is how you manage in-game adjustments. And modern football can be that 1% for you and helping you win tight games. And we call it the 1% advantage when we meet with coaches around the country that use this software.
Hopefully that gives you a better idea about what modern football technology is. I recommend taking a little of your time to book a demo and see exactly how it works. You can go to teammofo.com or go to the description and click the link. Let's get back to the think tank.
Well, and you can tell too when somebody comes in, that they want to talk ball, like they're a ball coach. And so then that's another way of like opening the door, like, oh, hey, this guy wants to sit down and actually talk football. Like I'll never forget, Billy Napier, this is 10 years ago he was at Alabama. I was at Lovejoy. He came in and literally talked to us for like an hour about just football and, what they're doing at Alabama, Nick Saban. I mean, we talked everything from like team building and culture to what he was doing on offense, so it's like you can sit there if you know a guy's like that. Hey, you remember I'm over here. That's a good introduction as well. And once you figure out like, oh, this guy really wants to talk ball all the time, that's another way of getting in and soaking that up if those guys are coming through your door.
Cody, who are you studying right now? What's the hot thing? Not to tease out what you're going to put out, but what are some good things? Because I have another week left of my time off, so I might want to get into something. What's something that's jumping into?
Yeah, I think a recommitment to the run game. I mean, I've done some guys, especially at the NFL level. I've talked to a couple of coaches in the NFL level. It's like this is the first year in probably a decade that we weren't sitting there sweating coverage stuff for about how are we going to defend this? What are we going to do here? I think a recommitment to the run game, run fits, different run structures, how people are like, right. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going back through from, usually I try and start from worst to best, so you got all the best, just because it is content. So I usually end with the top defenses towards the end of the summer. So like right now I'm going through, I just got done watching the Giants, Dexter Lawrence, and putting him in a tilt nose and trying to understand like, dude, the guy's in a tilt nose like the entire, like 90% of the snaps. Okay, why are they trying to do that? How is that reacting off of the fist? Or what are other things that they're doing? So I'm doing that. I think the other thing too that's really popular right now are these 5-man pressures and the different coverage structures behind them. You're not just getting fire zones or dog zone, however you want to label that, running quarters, running palms, how that structures, being able to do it against 3x1. Because it used to be if you're doing, quote unquote palms pressures, if you got a 3x1, you just went to fire zone because that's just what it was easy. Let's just go to fire zone. Now trying to figure out how does that adjust. That to me is another thing. Obviously, all the different Tampa's back. And I think it's a good thing.
Back.
Yes, it's back. It's big. It's not Tampa from 20 years ago. I think that's an important thing. It's these non-traditional Tampas, people painting a different picture, but using the same coverage. To me, I got done talking to a bunch of coaches in Houston a couple weeks ago. And the one thing, again, going back, how would I change things? Well, if you're playing match coverage on 90% of your downs, man coverage on, these man in these match coverages and everything's really tight, you don't ever have a release for your defensive backs. And so what is a good pairing? Well, you're starting to see if I'm a big cover 1 team, I'm running a bunch of these trap 2 Tampas, right? If I'm a big match team, match 3, I'm running a lot of Tampa coverage off of that and doing all these different rotations. These quarters teams are now figuring out ways to run maybe some spot drop cover 3 because you're so match heavy all the time. I'll never forget, last clinic season, I had multiple coaches like, yeah, we just run spot drop cover 3. And you're just like, you haven't heard that in almost 10, 15 years, right? But it's because what is the ecosystem right now? The ecosystem is match. Everybody wants to learn save and cover 7. Everybody wants to do rip liz. Everybody, I've got a bunch of coaches right now in the off season asking me about match quarters. How does this work? How does this function? So you have a lot of these. Match is still really, you have all this. Well, offensively, they're seeing it everywhere. So how, that ecosystem part. So to me, that's what I'm studying right now is, run fits, some of these whiteboard coverages. I call them whiteboard coverages because it's just X's on a board, right? It's just cover 3 with an X on board, Tampa with an X on a board, moving guys around, getting to different things. And then obviously the quarters, palms, pressures. I think too, just changing the way that you view early downs. I think the Vikings are a great example of this, of essentially changing the meta on first down what are people doing on early downs in these upper levels? Well, you play base, right? You line up, you play base, maybe you run a different coverage, but they're, hey, we're going to actually play, we're going to force the issue on early downs. And then how does that change your third downs? So kind of flipping the script on that, I think the more and more people are really exploring that, and you're starting to see a little bit more of these pressures, especially these early down gap pressures on. That's kind of what I'm looking at right now in the off season.
Well, the Tampa stuff, just because we face so much too high because of the speed that we have, we saw a lot of it. And I thought, 2 teams that did a really good job for people who want to study some of that stuff. Buffalo, I thought, did a great job. And then Arizona out of their, ish, 3 safety ish, whatever you want to call it. I thought those guys did a phenomenal job. Those 2 teams in particular, because it's crazy. Like the non-traditional Tampa to me is one of the cheapest things a defense can do, really. If you have the right, athletic ability to put people, you don't want your hook dropper taking a halfer if you can't. But, it's not complicated. You have two halves, you had a middle runner and hooks and flats, and let's go. And then, like you said, pairing that with one, because once you go down that route, now adding a fifth rusher is not that complicated. And then the other thing on that, because going the other direction from pressure, is the drop 8 world. It's like, if you get people forced into a passing situation, drop an 8, drop a 9, copping the defensive line out, and it's like, then what do? Your protection's set for pressure, and then they rush 2. How many times do you see people get home with 2 guys and it's 6-man pro? It's because it's not prepared in an easy post snap disguise. Yeah, so that 2 stuff is really interesting.
But I think you both bring up really good points in terms of what is the purpose of a study, right? Because while I'm not doing the exact same stuff you're doing, Cody, it's similar in base of where do you find the balance in what you're doing, right? Because similar to you, I'm a big match quarters guy. Where is that zone balance? For me right now, chasing base down pressure. Yeah, you brought up the Vikings. I went back and because my situation may be a little unique. So I'm a part of it's technically a restart at Roanoke. They had football here, but it stopped in 1942 with World War II. So, football then and football now in pretty much every way is different outside of the single wing.
I was going to say, they probably got some playbooks.
Yeah, so that's still there. But I kind of had to take a pause a little bit in some of the things we did schematically, because by design, we built this with a bunch of 18-year-olds. We went into the portal a little bit, but nothing crazy. We wanted to build it organically and teaching them how to play college football, literally teaching them how to play college football, regardless of scheme. That was the big focus. How do you be a college football player without anybody to show you an example? So we really kind of took a step back, but I took the data that we had from this year and then data from previous years and just kind of looked at where do I need to take calling the defense and finding the balance that I was talking about. And, again, what I had done, and it's what you alluded to earlier, I was doing things because this is the way they had been done. The third down menu was expansive and first and second down wasn't really, right? You maybe run some pressure, but really leave third down for kind of the exotic stuff. And, how can you pick on pass protection and all this stuff? But I went back over 5 years and 65% of our snaps, give or take a couple percentage points in each one of those years, were first and second down, not in the red zone or closer. And I'm talking even the high red. So we'll identify it as the 25 going in. Where is that score zone start? And looking at the amount of time and the amount of scheme that we were dedicating to that versus third down and fourth down, non-short yardage, which was only 20 to 25%, was astounding. And really kind of trying to reframe, okay, not that you need to pressure on every first and second down, but how do you find that balance and what does that balance look like within the framework of what we're doing? So not just looking at, what pressures do I want to run on first and second down? Is it more run or pass based? What do we want to do against 2x2 versus 3x1, the coverage wise and things like that? But it was more of the overarching picture of how do we need to, and how do I as a coordinator need to start changing my approach to this? Because as it turns out, a vast majority of the game is getting played on first and second down in non-distinct scenarios in the normal zone of the field. So for me, my thought is I need to get a little more diverse, or a lot more diverse, to be quite honest, those downs and distances, and then maybe be a little more simple on third down. And not necessarily that you can't have fun on those downs and distances, but really kind of expanding that menu, I thought it's been not just a rewarding, but a really beneficial study that I've been working on this offseason.
But Mike, how do you balance because certainly by frequency, those numbers bear out, but how do you balance the impact on the game that the third down has or the 4-point plays? I think that's the tough one of bearing it out.
Because I think you kind of brought it up, though, is what does that high stakes scenario look like? Is it third and max or is it third and medium? Again, not just you want to sit and drop 8 on third and max, but make them throw the ball underneath, go make a tackle and get off the field and get it to a certain point too, especially based on field position, where it won't be a bonus scenario. All right, fine, it's third and 13, but if the ball's on the plus 45 and they pick up 8 yards, now all of a sudden you're in the fringe zone, at least at our level, and now you are more likely to have to play 2 downs at that point coming off that third down. But, I think the leaning into not necessarily one thing over another, but being able to I'm going to use the phrase again, find the balance within the different parts of the game, right? Because, God, is it Pat Shurmur that had saw it on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, a few months back, but it's like the game's within the game, so we already brought up first and second down normal zones, third and fourth down, short yardage specifically being a different thing, the red zone and the goal line being a different thing, like being able to, and I'm still chasing this right now, especially with a young team and trying to figure out what we're going to lean into, but not just what is the overall balance, but how do you find the balance within those scenarios? So I don't know if that's a cop-out way of not answering your question, but to be determined right now, but looking at just understanding who we are and what our players are capable of, I think plays a huge part in.
I think to your point is a lot of times on early downs where you get a lot of data, right? So it's 65 to 70% of the game. So there's just a ton of data. And so I think a lot of coaches are just like, well, I just want the run pass ratio, right? Like, what is that? We're going to be more based on that early downs. But I think, like, to your point, if you really try and make a point of emphasis and shift the balance back to 50-50, because to Rob, to answer your question, the way that I look at it is like, you probably need to spend about half your time on those early downs, because the third down and getting off is important, right? But we also know that if we actually flip it and 70% of our time is spent on, creating cool exotic pressures on third down, and what coverage are we going to do? And all, what are we doing third and short, third and medium, third and long? If we would do the same thing on how are we looking at it first down, we just kind of shifted that back over. I think people would find that you actually get, if I can win these early downs, then I can spend less game planning time on third downs, because I don't have to have that, 25 play menu, right? Of all the hot, cold, and warm pressures. And, to that is, from the 30 to the 30, right, is essentially what we're talking about. And what are they running in that? And so I always tried to get distill everything down to like just the simplest form, right? What is the passing concept that they're trying to hit on these play action or RPOs? Are they a perimeter screen team? Are they an in-breaking team? Are they a snag team, right? Where they're running some hitch and a push, or a hitch and a flat, a slant flat. Like, are they a slot-based RPO team? Everything goes to the slot, hitch, fin, bubble, all of those. Like, to me, that, and then on top of that, what are the passing concepts that we see on normal downs? Because what you see on normal downs is probably not what they're going to be running on third downs. So when you start doing that and you distill it down, and then on top of that, what are they running, right? Are they a gap scheme team? Are they a pin pull team? Are they a zone team? Are they a man blocking insert team? How involved is the quarterback in the run game? Because what ends up happening, because even in zone read, right, if they're just zone and they're running pure zone, then we need to have all the zone beaters, and we're going to use those kind of 5-man pressure, or these creepers and sims that really attack that, two are away from the back. Now that really hones you in on what we need. If we don't see a lot of gap scheme, I probably don't need to have a lot of B gap pressures built in. I can use those for third down. So now I'm using something completely different. If they're not a gap scheme, to me, that's the best way to look at it. I mean, now we're seeing, like, for instance, zone teams do a lot of GT, right? Or they use it's GY all the time. So everything looks the same, right? So you're kind of getting the one thing they add is they just add the guard as a long trap. And so, like, what are they doing out of that? How are we going to defend that? Do we need to have something special for that? And so to me, I think that cuts down on what you need on that, is by distilling everything. What are the 5 run concepts that we need to defend? What are the 5 passing concepts that we need to defend? These are the 10 things that we need to be able to stop. And a lot of times you'll find out that 5 run concepts is a lot. It's more like 3. There's probably really only 3 things you got to defend. And then on the passing set, I think you can figure out that there's only 5 or 6 things. So now you're less than 10 things that we really have to defend. That really hones you in. And so now I'm not necessarily spending so much time on third down and then forgetting about those early down situations where you're just defaulting to base because you haven't studied it enough.
And I think the good one, Mike, that you mentioned was the get back on track, which, where is your second down?
Yeah.
I think second down and P and 10 are the 2 fascinating situations, because obviously everybody chops up third down, but how do you chop up defensively and offensively? How do you chop up your second down? And field position obviously plays into it, whether you're getting into a bonus situation formation 4-down deal. But, like what I saw a lot this year was, 2nd and 10 was a 3rd down, and so the defenses were treating it that way. So now you have like, okay, can you exploit that? Because if you're willing to run the ball on 2nd and 10, you can exploit some of those pressures if they're treating it as a pass deal. So I think that's something that 2nd and max get back on tracks. But, the 8 to 10s where you lost, 1st down, what does that look like going forward? The other one that was jumping out from a study standpoint, what I found in my first year in the NFL was how big personnel is. Ignorance of some of it. It's like, yeah, all tight ends are the same. No, they're not. When you get into roster size and things like that. So really understanding personnel. And then on the defensive side, you would get those things that technically are 3-3-5, but they're not. That's a 4-down nickel defense. So be able to understand like how people are utilizing personnel and how you can manipulate it. Because I think the more you can put personnel into buckets rather than just say like all 4-down is equal, it's like, no, it's not. And then incorporating stance and those things, like how do those things impact what's being called, where people are. And sometimes it's a comfortability thing. Sometimes it's a taught thing. But I think a lot of times our studies go to scheme, whereas like studying personnel groupings and people is another way to kind of laser focus yourself in. Like, I'm going to look at this as a 5-down look. What are those personnel packages that could get me to those spots?
Yeah, I think a great way to kind of look at that too is talking about not just who's on the field and like what they're capable of doing, but if you're talking about formation, like what type of formation is it? Y-off is probably the easiest example, right? That Y-off could look in a number of different ways. Mm-hmm. Is it a true traditional tight end? Is it a receiving tight end? Is it a back? Is it a fullback? Is it a wide receiver? It could be a number of things, but I think, if you want to be more simplistic I shouldn't say simplistic because, you can start tagging, it's 11 back or 11 Y or 11 whatever. But I think, when you look at studying something, bringing in something like formation type could help with that, where it's, okay, so it's 11, but the formation type is off Y. It's a true tight end, good enough in blocking and receiving, great. But now you get a different guy. It's 11 fast. So that could be a skinnier tight end that's mainly used as a receiver, who could also split out as a receiver. Again, you deal with personnel groupings now where those tight ends can be extremely multiple with where they align and what they can do. But like the biggest question is always, is he going to be a threat to get the ball in the run, right? Whether it's, can you line him up as a sniffer? Do you line him up as a wing? Do you line him up in the backfield? Whatever it is. So having something where it could be like 11 backs, if he's a threat to get the ball, even as simple as a dive in some sort of veer zone read scheme. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff because, I mentioned earlier, we deal with a lot of different offenses, but specifically with that tight end position, what can those tight ends do? There are some tight ends that will be brought onto the field against teams we play. We know they're not a receiving threat. So like they're not going out at all. So how do you now treat that? Is he an extra offensive lineman, right? And how do you want to adjust accordingly to that? But it's just, like you said, the diversity with which people can help you not just do what you're doing offensively or defensively, but also as you look to study, trying to figure out exactly what it is, because it may not be exactly what you think just at face value.
Yeah, and you made that point too about trying to get into a penny front out of a 4-down. I mean, one of the best examples of this is going to be in the Super Bowls with the Eagles and Zach Bond and Fangio, who watched Fangio for the last decade. Like, that's not something in his wheelhouse. But when you're presented with somebody like that can do it. And I think that's going back, Rob, to what you're saying with trends. You have to be multiple on defense now. You can't just be a 4-2 quarters team anymore. I would love that. That'd be great. 10 years ago, you could probably do that. Can't do that anymore. You got to find odd spacing. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of times at the college level now is, they're in a 4-down front, but that is not even spacing. That B gap is getting closed somehow. The reduction fronts have become really big. This whole off-ball creeper sim world that we kind of live in and is really popular. Those are just odd spacing. You're just force fitting in odd spacings. I think to me, finding different ways of, you would be surprised using your personnel of like, hey, if I just walk my will down to an edge and I shift down into a bear front, completely changes the way that the offense is going to look at it. Hadn't changed anything for me. I just, Will's going through the C gap. You move the defensive end inside. I'm not really teaching anything new, but that spacing, I'll never forget. This is when I was at Baylor, we had a 3-4 package. And when we put it in there, it would even though we were only in an under front. So we were playing our 4-2-5. We just flipped it to the 5 goes to the passing strength. So we just flipped it to an under front, but it really gave gave our offense difficulty because that was not something that had been, like, they think we're in an odd front. So like all their different things that they were doing, and they couldn't, it took them a couple of days of practice to figure out, oh, this is really just okay. So I think like just that if you do something all the same, it's creating a package and using personnel to paint a different picture. It's what the offense is doing. I mean, the offense is doing, I said in a clinic one time, the offense coach was like, yeah, we run like 10 plays, but every game we have 10 different formations and motions. So that kind of went off of me. I was like, wait, are they a flavor of the week team, or are they actually like a game plan team? Like every week so to me, it was like, oh, I just really need to know the concepts. And so I think when you look at it that way, offensively and defensively, it really helps you out with that personnel look.
No doubt. Well, it's so funny you mentioned that because I've spent time in my career on both sides of the ball, and it is fascinating I remember freaking out about stuff on defense that like the offense couldn't care less about. Like, it's like, they're going to do this. It's like, yeah, we're not doing it. And it's the same thing on offense. It's like, it's a zero nose. Yeah, but it's not. So like, it's an even front. Like, just deal with it. But it is so funny, as a tale as old as time, I think, that the other side of the ball sometimes gives way too much credit to the schemes, because they got to play also on some of that stuff, which I guess that's kind of a question I have for you guys too, is like, so you study, you have the time, like, all right, now it's July or now it's spring ball or something like that. What are some ways that you've presented some of your studies? What are some ways that allowed it to merge into your game plan, into your installs? How do you then make this information that's been gathered like actionable and applicable?
What I do is with match quarters is pretty much what I did as a coach. Was you create some sort of a presentation that you're going to teach this, and you teach it to the staff, right? Like, I mean, you find out really quickly, you're about 5 minutes into your presentation and you're like, yeah, this isn't going to work, guys. Like, everybody's kind of sitting there like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, that's cool and all, but like, how are, the guy that you want to do that is like, the school board kid. And there's no way, like, he's just playing because we don't have anybody else. Like, there's no way you can do that. And so to me, I think you have to teach it, right? So, it goes back to, and I've always said this about clinics, it's like, clinics are fun, clinics are awesome. Okay. We get a bunch of information and really cool things. But then, okay, when I go back to my school and my kids, how am I going to teach this? How can I put this into my language? Do we have the tools already in place to then build that? So I think, to your point, the way you do it is you spend a week, or you just drop everything and you say, everybody's got project. I think it's important for everybody to have a project on the staff, whether you're at the high school level or not. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could just be like, one year I had the head coach when I was at Midlothian, Doug Wendell, asked me one time, he's like, hey, got a ton of unbalanced trips this year out of two back. Can you go and study that and see different ways? And I was like, yeah, that's great. I mean, it doesn't have to take you very long. You start going through and finding teams that were doing it. And then you kind of look how to defend it, how are other people doing it? And then you present that. And hey, these are the ways that we were doing it. These are some cool new things that we could probably add in. Or hey, our structure was completely wrong in this. We probably need to have an overhang on the backside for all of these plays, especially with a sling tight end. So to me, I think if you're a defensive coordinator or you're a position coach, find what were you having trouble with? Go study that. How are teams defending that? Ask around, and then have a presentation, and then spend a week where everybody, and it, like I said, it could be 30 minutes after school or after, during lunch or whatever. Hey, we're going to meet in the office. So-and-so, our D-line coach is going to have a 20-minute presentation on this specific topic, and he's going to teach it to us. And I think, to me, that's the best way to do it.
And on the kind of the other side of it, advanced opponent scouting, right? Especially early games in the season, especially if you've got early conference or district or whatever it is games. Every game is a snapshot, right? And you can look at them individually, but at some point, finding the full picture of who you're playing or who you're preparing for is really important. And while that picture may change year to year, especially if there's staff and scheme carryover, all right, so we're going to play this team next year. Who were they this past season? And not just in the game that they played us. And assigning, kind of like you were talking about, Cody, you got 4 guys on staff, you got 8 conference opponents. Give each guy 2 and just have an outline of what the advanced scouting report needs to look like. It doesn't need to be necessarily nearly as in-depth as what the scouting report will be the week you play them, but get an idea of what were they doing? What were they successful at? Did it change from when they played us to the end of the season or whatever it is? Or if you played them later in the season, obviously, did it change from what they were doing in the beginning? And try and get a bit of a predictor. But, I'm a work smarter, not harder guy. And if you can cut out time on the front end, especially when you talk about game planning, and not that you need to start developing your game plan in the summer before a season for an opponent you're going to play in 3 months, but you can start getting some pretty good ideas of if this holds true in the game tape that we'll get from them this season from last season, this could end up being a pretty good thing. And especially if you couple it with things that you're looking to improve on or diversify within your scheme, all of a sudden you're now working months ahead on something that they may have never seen before.
Right.
Giving you especially an added advantage, right? Offensive guys always hold the pen last, obviously. But, if you can do some things to mitigate that a bit, I think that, especially on the front end, that can end up being really beneficial. But that's what we've done the last few years, is trying to work a little bit ahead, even on teams that we know well, but, maybe we didn't see them after week 4.
Yeah.
Trying to get
They changed.
Yeah, it might have changed for sure.
And I think if it makes a new idea or something like that, makes it past the staff and you're going to go add a wrinkle in or add something in, the next piece is understanding, like, all right, how are we going to get the kids to buy in, get the players to understand, get to buy in. And I think you have to be very deliberate with how you teach it and how you sell it, especially if it's a little bit more drastic change, because just throwing it out there and saying, hey, we're going to do this, I think players are smart enough. Like, well, did you just see that on TV? Or give me the why? Like, why are we doing this? And how will this help? And that's been interesting, at the NFL level. It's like this is their profession, but it still applies to every level of football. Every player is trying to get something out of this person. And so how is this going to help me? How is this going to help us be successful? And I think it's very important for the coaching staff to be aligned on it, to understand the why and be able to articulate the why if it makes it out of that study, presentation, vetting process, and then going through. Because that's, whether it's spring practice, OTAs, or just like, whatever your off-season program is, there's that chance to say, like, hey, this is going to be a focus for us. This is why. This is how we can take advantage of it. And then usually get a better buy-in from that on the player standpoint.
100% agree.
What do you guys think? Are we in good shape?
No, that was awesome. Really, like, a ton of just great topics in there. So thank you, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Think Tank on the Coach and Coordinator Network, presented by our partners, Modern Football Technology. Real-time tendencies, real-time results. Visit teammofo.com to learn more about how their cutting-edge tools can elevate your coaching. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.